Mozambique focus on two narratives. The one is the humanitarian disaster. The second is on the natural gas fields in the region. We have different stakeholders in the armed conflict, obviously a jihadi insurgency, which is new to that part of Portuguese-speaking Africa, then Russian and other acting mercenaries on the ground, working on behalf of the government and security forces linked to the major oil contractors. Two prevailing questions from a security perspective are who is fighting whom on a tactical level and who are the proxy stakeholders. Here to talk about that is Luís Bernardino, an Infantry Lieutenant Colonel in the Portuguese Army with the Staff Course and currently conducting research at the Center for International Studies at the Lisbon University Institute. Colonel Bernardino, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. So what I can say now is that we are facing in the north part of Mozambique, Cabo Delgado province, a huge and very complex security problem. It's not only a security problem for Mozambique, but I think it's also a regional problem and also for Africa and for the world. First, it's complex because at the same level we have the Mozambique states, we're not able to provide any security conditions to the population and for the society. And second, we have a couple of stakeholders that are facing also a different kind of challenge. And that's why this region, it's a little bit difficult and the complexity of the situation. So as we see in the last, well, the problem is not new. The problem, we have seen a couple of events happen since the last 3-4 years. But in fact, the small events that happened in the northern Mozambique, it became more frequent and it became with a larger scale. And so what we saw in the last year and the beginning of this year in Palma and Mochimboa da Praia, it's more or less a coordinated attack from a couple of, I would say, jihadists / bandits, because we have both things that happen at the same time, but in fact, they were able to provide an attack, a coordinated attack from different directions and trying to touch a couple of infrastructure situations, mainly in the north. So I would say that we have at the same level two different stakeholders. First, we have a couple of jihadists that are creating a group of people that are facing a couple of challenges, and they want to fight the jihad and impose a couple of jihadist ideas in this Mozambique northern part of the country. But at the same time, what we see from the field is a couple of young people. They don't know nothing about jihad, but at the same time, because you pay a couple of dollars a day, they will fight for you. And they will fight understanding nothing about the situation and understanding nothing about what is the Al-Shabaab, what is the big stakeholders behind this conflict. So I will say that the jihadist group is taking advantage of this population, and they bring to a large group and give him some weapons and paying some money, of course, and they fight first for the jihadists, but I think they fight also for, they want to get money and they want to get the conditions to survey in this very difficult area of the country.
Sorry, you talk about jihadi insurgents. Who is the leader of these insurgents? Where do they get their weapons from?
Well, we know that there are some links between what we call the Al-Shabaab and this new Al-Shabaab. In fact, in Mozambique, we have a jihadist group they call the Ansar al-Sunnah. It's more or less they call by the tradition defenders. and they provide support from weapons, support from communications, support from logistic to the insurgents, and they were able to get together and to train a couple of people, not more than 100, because they were not more than 100, fighting from different directions. And what we see, it's more or less a kind of fight for 1 to 3 days, and then they go out and they disappear to the interior of Mozambique, and also they cross the Tanzanian border and they go for different places where they get together in small groups. So I will say that the tacticals is they regroup and they go for one directions, fighting against the population and doing this kind of criminal acts. And then after 1 day or 2 days, they simply disappear and they mixed from the population. And some of them, they have small leaders. They go to the north, to the Tanzanian border, and they just vanish. They just disappear. So that's why it's a little bit difficult to fight these small groups, because the Mozambique armed forces was not to intel and to get all the information from these attacks, and they react, in fact, a little bit too late. So I will say that the small attacks since 2019, 2020, they just growing, getting bigger. And what we saw in the beginning of this year, it's more or less reflects of a bigger training, a bigger involvement, and of course, a bigger number of people that was paid for fight in the name of Ansar al-Sunnah. That is something that we never heard before.
So on a strategic level, what do you say? What do you say we know about these insurgents? And I mean, on the counterinsurgent side, is there some sort of sense of strategic coordination and consolidated response?
Well, I don't think so. I think that they just fight for a couple of dollars a day. They just fight for small causes. But in the end, I don't see any strategical alignment with other groups or what we can call a jihad war, or something bigger that involves a link to Islamic State or something like this. So I will say that we don't see any strategical level engagement or coordination. What we see more, it's tactical groups, small number. They will train and they will fight together in a small targets, and they just come fight, they stay, and they disappear. So now that the armed forces is a little bit more engaged in the area, and they are doing a little bit more of military activity, we might have less jihad activity or less impact in this kind of attacks in the north of Mozambique. So we might disappear for a couple of months, and they might disappear for 1 year. We never know. But what we might have in the future is again small attacks and small scale attacks, fighting against the population and maybe against a couple of international interests that you know that exist in the area. A couple of numbers that maybe you know from 2017 until now, we have about 1,000 deaths, about 550 attacks, and about 7,000 refugees. So, and the population is a little bit scared about this, because they don't feel enough protected by the armed forces, the national armed forces, and they run not only for the attacks but for the rumors. You know, they just send a couple of messages, and the people start to run, just before the attacks or before something happens, because they feel that they're not safe in this area and they feel they want to be in the middle of a war or something. So this internal displaced people, it's getting bigger and bigger, not only because of the fighting and the attacks, but also a couple of rumors and some insights or some discussions or maybe some the media. And also, I think that's maybe important to talk about fake news, because sometimes we see a couple of fake news and what we see from the news is not exactly what's happening on the terrain. So we have to make a little bit the comparison, and we have to understand a little bit better what's happening on the field. And sometimes we see a couple of films and a couple of photos that is from another parts of the world, or other parts from Africa. And sometimes people get confused by this, which is not good, of course.
Of course, you mentioned that this might disappear for a month or a year, but you're not ruling out that it will stop. So you do not think that this will stop?
In fact, I think that this is gonna be a problem for the next couple of years, because people that try to take advantage of the situation, getting money from fighting, getting money from the population. And of course, in the middle of this, you find a couple of jihadist leaders. They want to take, of course, advantage of the situation. So what we see now is a reinforce of the security situation in the north of Mozambique by the national armed forces, but also by a couple of stakeholders. But what you're going to see is a reinforce of these presences. So the national armed forces is getting better conditions, and what we are doing now, it's reinforce also the intel capability and be able to track these small groups and be able to react in order and react more rapidly what's happening on the field, and trying to get a little bit the control by anticipation and not running against the fight and not running against the small groups. So that's a big challenge for the future. But I will say that for the next couple of months, maybe years, these small attacks will gonna happen, but I will say very small scales and very small in details in very specific areas, and not like we have seen in the last couple of months.
Mm-hmm. The EU appears as a security provider in maritime forces off the Horn of Africa and increasingly in West Africa. There is significant land force in the Sahel. Is the EU intending on becoming the primary security provider? And if that is the case, who do you think will spearhead this effort?
Okay, that's very, very good question. As I see, European Union going to be engaged in the EUTM Mozambique, a kind of a training advising mission, like we have in the Somalia, in the Sahel, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. But I don't think that's going to be the main stakeholder on the Mozambique. And in fact, I think that's going to be a regional solution for this regional problem. So maybe what we're going to see, it's the African Union and the SADC task force engage in the area with a mission, and they will try to provide the security on the north part of Mozambique. They will try to fight the jihadists. They will try to fight the situation, and I think they will have to have the conditions to provide the security to the population on the north part of Mozambique. The European Union, yes, they're going to be a stakeholder, they're going to be part of the solution, but not directly engaged in the situation. What we're going to see, and in Portugal, I think, is doing a great job on this. They're trying to create a mission for training the Mozambican armed forces. And they will try to advise, they'll try to get the conditions in the middle, long term for the armed forces to get more operationality and more conditions. So Portugal, bilaterally, in this moment, they will provide some training. So what they have, what we call the project number 6. And this project number 6 is important because, as we see, it's one more project related to the bilateral cooperation, and is not engaged in the fight, is not engaged in providing direct solutions for the problem, but is a kind of reinforce of the cooperation. It's more or less another project that brings a couple of militaries to train the Mozambique armed forces and providing better conditions to, in the middle term, to get another kind of response to the situation. So Portugal, by one side, is engaged bilaterally, training this Marine Corps, also providing some intel advisors. And by the other hand, is trying to get some support for the countries from the European Union and trying to create another mission for the European Union in the Mozambique. And I'm quite sure that is going to happen in the next 2-3 months, because we have a couple of recce teams in Mozambique at the moment. And I think that they're trying to get the most information to create the conditions to get this mission in place for the next 2-3 months. Another problem, and you touched the problem at the very beginning of your questions, it's what happened on the sea. So what we're going to see on the sea level? Do we going to have another mission? Or we're going to have more or less an extension for the Horn of Africa, and we're going to have another United Nations mission or NATO mission or something like this. We don't know for the moment. We expect that the situation going to be resolved by the regional engage on the situation in the north, and by this European Union backside support for the reinforce of the Mozambique armed forces. And then we're going to see what's happened. Because if the situation stay more or less like this, I think nothing going to change. And at the level C, we don't going to see nothing more. If the situation going to be deterioration, so if you're going to see more fights, or the situation is not solved, maybe you're going to be there's going to be a reinforce of the presence of the United Nations and the European Union, and maybe the NATO going to be engaged on the sea, trying to get more conditions for the safety conditions on land.
Colonel Bernardino, thank you for your time.